Oh, oh, sorry. Oh, gosh. I mean, if ever a man found a guinea when he was looking for a pin, it is my good friend, Professor Gibbon. I mean, I've heard of investigators overshooting the mark before, but never to this extent. I mean, he really has, I think, without any touch of exaggeration, found something to revolutionize human life. And that when he was simply looking for an all-round stimulant to bring languid people up to the stresses of these pushful days. Now, I've tasted the stuff myself several times now, and I can't do better than describe for you the effect that it has on me. I mean, that there are astonishing experiences in store for all in search of new sensations will, I'm sure, become apparent enough to you. Now, Professor Gibbon, as many of you probably know, is my neighbour in Folkestone. And unless my memory plays a trick, his portrait has already appeared in the Strand magazine. I think it was in late 1899. You'll recall perhaps the high forehead and the singularly long black eyebrows, which give his face such a Mephistophelian touch. He occupies one of those pleasant little detached houses in the mixed style that make the western end of the Upper Sandgate Road so interesting. His is the one with the Flemish gables and the Moorish portico. And it is in a little room with a mullioned bay window that he works when he's down here, and in which of an evening he and I have so often smoked and talked together. Now, he's a mighty jester, certainly is Gibbon, but also he likes to talk to me about his work quite seriously. I mean, he's one of those men who finds a stimulus in talking. And so I've been able to follow the conception of the new Accelerator from a very early stage. Now, as everyone knows, or at least every intelligent person knows, the special department in which Gibbon has gained so great a reputation among physiologists is the action of drugs upon the nervous system, upon soporifics, sedatives, and anaesthetics. He is, I'm told, quite unequalled. But he's also a chemist of considerable eminence, and in the last few years he's been particularly assiduous upon the question of nervous stimulants. I mean, already before the discovery of the new Accelerator, he was very successful in this field. I believe, for instance, that in cases of exhaustion, the preparation known as Gibbon's bee syrup has already saved more lives than any lifeboat around the coast. But none of these little things satisfy me, he told me nearly a year ago. They're incomplete, you know. Either they increase the central energy without affecting the nerves, or they simply increase the available energy by lowering the nervous conductivity. And you see, they're all local in their operation. You know, one wakes up the heart and the viscera and leaves the brain stupefied, or one gets at the brain champagne fashion and does nothing for the solar plexus. No, you see, what I want and what I mean to have, my friend, is a stimulant that stimulates all round, you know? That wakes you up from the crown of your head to the tip of your big toe and makes you go 2 or even 3 to everyone else's 1. Yeah, that's what I'm after. Gosh, it sounds exhausting, I said. Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and you'd eat double or treble and all that. But just think what it would mean. I mean, imagine yourself with a little phial like this. He held up a small bottle of clear glass. And in this little container is the power to think twice as fast, move twice as quickly, do twice as much in a given time as you could otherwise. Impossible, surely, I said. Oh, well, if it is, then I've wasted the last year. But no. You see, these various preparations of the hyperphosphates, for example, they suggest that something of the sort can be achieved. And I mean, you know, even if it was only 1.5 times as fast, it would do. It certainly would do, I said. I mean, if you're a statesman in a corner, for example, he went on, time rushing up against you, something urgent to be done, he could dose his private secretary, I said, yeah, and think of you if you wanted to finish a book. Yeah? Or a busy doctor wants to sit down and think out a case, or a barrister, a man cramming for an examination, an actor learning his lines. Yeah, worth a guinea a drop to men like that, I said. Or again, in a duel, said Gibbon, yeah? When it all comes down to speed. Or in fencing, I said. Exactly, yeah, fencing. You've got it exactly. and you really think that such a thing is possible, I said. He was silent for a moment and smiled at me. Then he slowly held up his green file. Well, as a matter of fact, now that nervous smile upon his face was not enough to cover the gravity of his revelation. I mean, he rarely talked of his actual experimental work until something was very near the end. And it may be, he said, well, I shouldn't be surprised, but it may even do the thing at a greater rate than twice. Gosh, I said, that would be rather a big thing. Oh, yes. Yes, he said, it would be rather a big thing. But for all that, I don't think even he knew quite how big a thing it was to be. Now, I remember we had several talks about the stuff after that, the new Accelerator, he called it, and his tone grew more confident with each occasion. Sometimes he talked nervously of unexpected physiological results its use might have, and then he got a little unhappy. But at others, he was frankly mercenary, and we debated long how the preparation might be turned to commercial account. I mean, I'm giving the world something spectacular, he said. I think it's fair enough that we should expect the world to pay something for it. I mean, the dignity of science is all very well, but, well, I think I should have the monopoly on it for what, 10 years? What do you think? I don't see why all the fun in life should go to the dealers in ham. And my own interest in the Accelerator certainly did not wane in this time either. The marvel of drugs has always been very great in my mind. I mean, how you can madden or calm a man. I mean, you can make an incredibly strong and alert or a helpless log, all by means of chemicals. And here was a new miracle to be added to this strange armory in which I had such interest. It was on the 10th of August that Gibbon told me that the thing was done. And the new Accelerator was a tangible reality in the world. I met him as I was going up Sandgate Hill. I was going to get my hair cut, which I always hate. And he came hurrying towards me. I remember then thinking that his eyes were unusually bright and his face flushed. And I noted even then an alacrity in his step. It's done, he cried and gripped my hand, speaking very fast. It's more than done. Come up and see. Really? Really? Incredibly. Come up and see. What? And it does it? Twice? Twice? More, much more. God, it scares me what it does. But come on, come up, taste it, try it. It's the most amazing stuff on earth. He gripped my arm and went shouting with me up the hill. I mean, he was walking at such a pace that I was forced into a trot. It was one of those hot, clear days, every colour incredibly bright and every outline hard. And there was a breeze, but not so much as sufficed under these conditions to keep me cool and dry. I panted for mercy. Oh, sorry, am I walking too fast, he said, and he slackened his pace to a quick march. You've been taking some already, haven't you? I said. No. Well, perhaps a little drop of water in a beaker from which I'd washed out the last traces of the stuff. I took some last night, though, but that's ancient history now. And it goes twice, I said. It goes 1,000 times, my dear fellow. Many thousand times. Who knows how many times it goes? He laughed, flinging open his front door. But we'll test all that afterwards. The thing is to try some stuff now. What? Try it now? Yes, rather, said Gibbon, directing me into his study. There it is. Here, do you remember I showed you before? Unless you're afraid. Well, I am. I'm a careful man by nature, only theoretically adventurous. I was afraid, but on the other hand, there's pride. What? And you say you've tried it yourself already? I've tried it myself, and do I look any the worse? He said. Come on, I don't even look liverish, and I feel He burst into laughter. All right, give me some then, I said. Anything to put off getting a haircut. How'd you take the stuff? With water, he said, whacking down a carafe. And then he stood in front of his desk and regarded me, his manner suddenly affected by a touch of the Harley Street specialist. It's rum stuff, you know. I must warn you, as soon as you got it down, shut your eyes and open them very cautiously in a minute or so's time. I mean, one still sees well enough, but there's a kind of shock to the retina, I suppose, a nasty, giddy confusion if the eyes are opened too quickly. So keep them shut, all right, until I say so. Shut, yes, good, all right. And the next thing is, keep quite still. Yeah, I mean, don't begin to whack about. You may fetch something a nasty rap if you do. Remember, you'll be going several thousand times faster than you've ever gone before. Heart, lungs, muscles, brain, everything. And you'll hit hard without knowing it. I mean, you'll feel just as you do now, only everything in the world will seem to be going so many thousand times slower. That's what makes it so damned queer. Are you ready then? I nodded. Right. He glanced at the material in his desk. File, glasses, water. Now, it mustn't take too much in the first attempt. The little file glugged out its precious contents. Now, don't forget what I told you, he said. Eyes tightly shut, absolute stillness for 2 minutes, and then you'll hear me speak. He added an inch or so of water to the little dose in each glass. And now, he said, the new accelerator. The new accelerator, I said. Bottoms up. We drank, and I closed my eyes. Now, you know, that blank non-existence into which one drops when one's taken gas. You know, for an indefinite interval, it was like that. And then I heard Gibbon telling me to wake up, and I stirred and opened my eyes. And there he stood, as he'd been standing before, glass still in his hand. It was empty. That was the only difference I could see. Well, I said, nothing out of the way. No. Well, a slight feeling of exhilaration, I suppose. Nothing more. Sounds. Well, things are still. God, by Jove, yes, they are still. Except the sort of faint pattering sound is like rain falling on different things. Well, what's that? Then he nodded towards the window. Have you ever seen a curtain fixed like that before? I followed his eyes, and there was the end of the curtain, frozen, as it were, in the act of flapping in the breeze. Ah, that is odd, I said. And look, he said, and opened the hand that held the glass. Now, naturally, I winced, expecting this glass to smash on the floor, but far from falling, it didn't even seem to stir. It hung, mid-air, motionless. Roughly speaking, said Gibbon, an object in these latitudes falls 16 feet in the first second. This glass is falling 16 feet a second now, only you see, it hasn't been falling yet for the 100th part of a second. That gives you some idea of the pace of my accelerator. And he waved his hand round and over and under this slowly sinking glass. Finally, he took it by the bottom, pulled it down, and placed it carefully on the table. Then he looked at me and laughed. And I began very gingerly to raise myself from the chair. I felt perfectly well, very light and comfortable, in fact, and quite confident in my mind. But you see, I was racing all over. I looked out of the window, and an immovable cyclist, head down, with a frozen puff of dust behind his driving wheel, scorched to take over a galloping, motionless charabanc. I gaped in amazement. Gibbon, how long does this stuff last? No idea, he said. I mean, the last time I took it and I went to bed and slept it off. I mean, I told you I was frightened. It must have lasted some minutes, I think, but it seemed like hours. I mean, after a bit, it does slow down rather suddenly. Well, I was proud to observe that I did not feel frightened, but perhaps because there were two of us. Shall we go out? I asked. Oh, I think so, he said. But I mean, won't people see us? God, no. We'll be going 1,000 times faster than the quickest conjuring trick that's ever been done. Come on. Which way shall we go out? Window or door? And so, out by the window we went. I mean, assuredly, of all the strange experiences that I've ever had or imagined or read of other people having or imagining, that little raid that I made with Gibbon on the Folkestone Leas under the influence of the new Accelerator was the strangest and maddest of all. We went out by his gate onto the road, and there we made a minute examination of the statuesque passing traffic. The tops of the wheels and some of the legs of the horses of the charabanc were perceptibly in motion, but all the rest of the lumbering conveyance seemed absolutely still and quite noiseless, except for a faint rattling that came from one man's throat. I mean, the effect, as we walked about, began by being madly queer and ended by being disagreeable. I mean, there were people just like ourselves caught in mid-gesture. A girl and a man smiled at one another, a leering smile that threatened to last forever. A woman in a floppy capelline rested her arm on the rail and stared at Gibbon's house with the unwinking stare of eternity. A man stroked his moustache like a figure of wax. We stared at them, we laughed at them, we made faces at them, and then, you see, a sort of disgust of them came upon us, and we turned away and walked round in front of the cyclist towards the Leas. Goodness, said Gibbon, look at this. He pointed, and there, at the tip of his finger, sliding down the air with wings flapping at the speed of an exceptionally languid snail, was a bee. And so we came upon the Leas, where the thing seemed madder than ever. A brass band was playing in the upper stand. I mean, though all the sound it made for us was this low-pitched, wheezy rattle, a sort of prolonged sigh that passed at times into sound like the snow, muffled ticking of some monstrous clock. People stood like dummies, hung mid-stride over the grass. I passed close to a little poodle, suspended in the act of leaping, and I watched the slow movement of its legs as it sank to earth. Ah, yuck! Look at this, said Gibbon, and we halted for a moment before a magnificent gentleman in white flannels and a Panama hat, who turned back to wink at two gaily dressed young ladies that he just passed. Now, a wink, studied with such leisurely deliberation as we could afford, is, I discovered, a very unattractive thing. You know, it loses any quality of alert gaiety. Well, one notices that the winking eye does not, in fact, completely close, and that under its drooping lid appears the lower edge of an eyeball and a little line of white. Oh, heaven give me memory, I said, and I'll never wink again. Or smile, said Gibbon, with his eye on the lady's answering teeth. You know, it's infernally hot somehow, Gibbon, I said. Let's go a bit slower, yeah? Oh, come on, he said. Enjoy yourself. We picked our way among the bath chairs in the path. A purple-faced little gentleman was frozen in the midst of a violent struggle to refold his newspaper against the wind. In fact, there were many evidences that these people were exposed to a considerable breeze, a breeze that had no existence so far as our sensations went. We came out and we walked a little way from the crowd, and then we turned and regarded it. I just see all that multitude changed to a picture, smitten rigid, as it were. It was impossibly wonderful. I mean, it was absurd, of course, but it filled me with an irrational and exultant sense of superiority. I mean, think about it. All that I had said and thought and done since that stuff had begun to work had happened, so far as the world in general was concerned, in the twinkling of an eye. The new Accelerator. I began to say something to Gibbon, but he interrupted me. Ah, he said, there's that ghastly old woman. What old woman? I said. Oh, the one who lives next door to me. And her horrible yapping lapdog. Oh, look at it, that disgusting creature. Oh, ah, yeah, the temptation is too strong. Now, there is something very boyish and impulsive about Gibbon at times, and before I could say anything, he dashed forward, snatched the unfortunate dog out of visible existence, and was running violently with it towards the cliff. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. Gibbon had it by the neck, but the little brute didn't bark or wriggle or make the slightest sign of vitality. It was like running along with a rugby ball. Gibbon, put it down, I cried, and slow down. If you run like that, you'll set your clothes on fire. Your trousers are already getting charred as it is. He clapped his hand on his thigh and stood hesitating on the verge. Gibbon, I cried, coming up, put the dog down. This heat is too much, 2 or 3 miles a second. Friction of the air. Think about it. What? Friction of the air. Like meteorites and things, too hot. And Gibbon, you can see people stirring slightly. I think the stuff's working off. Put the dog down. Hey, it's working off. We're too hot and the stuff is working off. He stared at me and then at the brass band, the wheezy rattle of whose performance was certainly getting faster. By Jove, he said, I think you're right. Yeah, that man's moving his pocket handkerchief perceptibly. And then with a tremendous sweep of the arm, he hurled the little dog into the air. It spun upward, still inanimate, and then hung at last over a knot of chattering people carrying parasols. Gibbon gripped my elbow. We must get out of this sharp, he said. But we could not get out of it sharply enough. Luckily, perhaps, because I think we might have run. And if we had run, we would, I believe, have burst into flames. But before we could even begin our escape, the action of the drug ceased. I mean, it was the business of a minute fraction of a second. The effect of the new Accelerator passed like the drawing of a curtain, vanished in the movement of a hand. I heard Gibbon's voice in infinite alarm. Sit down, he said, and flop down upon the turf at the edge of the leas I sat, scorching it as I sat. There's a patch of burnt grass still there where I sat down upon it. And as I did so, the whole stagnation seemed to wake up. The disarticulated vibration of the band rushed together into a blast of music. The promenaders put their feet down and walked their ways. The papers and flags began flapping. Smiles passed into words. The winker finished his wink and went on his way. And all the seated people moved and spoke. The whole world had come alive again and was going as fast as we were, or rather, we were going no faster than the rest of the world. I mean, it was like slowing down as one comes into a railway station. Everything seemed to spin and spin for a second or two. I had the most transient feeling of nausea, and that was all. The little dog, which had seemed to hang for a moment when the force of Gibbon's arm was extended, fell with a swift acceleration clean through a lady's parasol. And that was the saving of us. But for one corpulent old gentleman in a bath chair who did start at the sight of us, I don't think a solitary person remarked our sudden appearance among them. The attention of everyone, including the brass band, was arrested by the amazing fact, and the still more amazing yapping caused by the fact, that a respectable, overfed lapdog, sleeping quietly to the east of the bandstand, should suddenly fall through the parasol of a lady on the west of the bandstand in a slightly singed condition. Chairs were overturned. Policemen ran in. How the matter settled itself, I simply don't know. We were too anxious to get out of range of the eye of the fat old gentleman in the bath chair to make any inquiries. As soon as we were sufficiently cool, we recovered from our giddiness and nausea and confusion. We stood up and we directed our steps back along the road towards Gibbon's house. Now, the sudden return of movement and familiar noises and our natural anxiety about ourselves, I mean, our clothes were still very, very hot to the touch. They prevented the minute observations that I would have liked to make. I mean, indeed, I really made no observations of any scientific value at all on that return to Gibbon's house. The bee, of course, had gone. I looked for the cyclist, but he was already out of sight as we came into Sandgate Road. The charabanc was clattering away at a spanking pace. I did note, however, that the impressions of our feet on the gravel of the path were unusually deep. And well, that was my first experience of the new accelerator. Practically, we'd been running about for the space of a second or so of time, but the effect it had upon us was that the whole world had stopped for our convenient inspection. We had lived half an hour while the brass band had played perhaps 2 bars. I mean, considering all things, and particularly considering our rashness in venturing out of the house, the experience might have been much more disagreeable than it was. I mean, it showed no doubt that Gibbon still has much to learn before his preparation is a manageable convenience, but its practicability is demonstrated beyond all cavil. I mean, since that adventure, he has been steadily bringing the accelerator's use under control. And I have several times, and without the slightest bad result, taken measured doses under his direction. Although I must confess I have not as yet ventured outside again while under its influence. I mean, I can tell you now, for example, that this account was written at one sitting and without interruption, except for the nibbling of some chocolate, while under the influence. I began writing it at 7:55 p.m. and as you know, this broadcast started promptly at 8 p.m. I mean, the convenience of securing a long, uninterrupted spell of work in the midst of a day full of engagements cannot be exaggerated. Gibbon is now working at the quantitative handling of his preparation with a special reference to its distinctive effect upon different types of constitution. He then hopes to find a retarder which will dilute its present rather excessive potency. This retarder will, of course, have the reverse effect of the accelerator, and used alone, it should enable the patient to spread a few seconds over many hours of ordinary time, to maintain an apathetic inaction, a glacier-like absence of alacrity amidst the most animated or irritating circumstances. The two things together must necessarily work an entire revolution in civilized existence. This is the beginning of our escape from that time garment of which Carlyle speaks. I mean, while the accelerator will enable us to concentrate ourselves with tremendous impact upon any moment or occasion that demands our utmost sense and vigour, the retarder will enable us to pass in tranquillity through infinite hardship and tedium. All right, well, yeah, perhaps I'm being a bit optimistic about the retarder, which indeed still has to be invented. But about the accelerator, there's no possible doubt. Its appearance upon the market in a convenient, controllable form is a matter of the next few months. It will be obtainable at all chemists and druggists in small bottles like this at a high, but considering its extraordinary qualities, by no means an excessive price. Gibbon's Nervous Accelerator, it will be called. And he hopes to be able to supply it in 3 strengths, one in 200, one in 900 and one in 2000, distinguished by yellow, pink and white labels, respectively. I mean, there's no doubt that its use renders a great number of very extraordinary things possible. For, of course, the most remarkable and possibly even criminal proceedings may be effected with impunity by thus dodging, as it were, into the interstices of time. I mean, like all potent preparations, it will be liable to abuse. We have, however, discussed this aspect of the question very thoroughly, and we've decided that this is purely a matter of medical jurisprudence and altogether outside our own province. We will manufacture and sell the accelerator, and as for the consequences, well, we shall see. Anyway, thank you for your time.